Alright, party people, it's time to rank all of the party house guests. And we're going to go through this in the same order that we tackle it in game, right? So, first things first, let's just throw these three up on the board. And this is, of course, our starting party, our old buddies, our rich pals, and our wild buddies. In basically this order, the money is, sometimes you're in a real bad scenario, and this is all you can do for cash. So you just have to do it. Otherwise, these two are all basically never getting purchased. But the first thing that we are doing in any match, once we get our basics going, is to look for more cash. So this is our worst option for cash. Let's kind of work our way up from there. If we wanted the next best option, it's probably something like Ticket Taker. So this is -1 +2, so it's only net 1 resource, which is the same as a rich buddy, except it gives you the 2 in cash, and the cash is more valuable than the popularity, so this is a fine trade. Just not particularly efficient, and really not something that I want more than one of. It's a nice little supplement to cash, but it really ideally is not my primary cash earner in any setup. Similarly, another unit that I only want one of is Celebrity, and Celebrity has a special ability that she brings 2 friends with her. Scores 5 total resources, which is great, but bringing an additional 2 spots can screw you over in a couple different ways. Enough so that I really don't like taking Celebrity. If I do, I really only want one. The second one compounds it just so much more. It turns on so many more ways that you can accidentally end your own party without even wanting to, that it's just a little bit too much to play around for me. Even though it is a good chunk of resources, just not worth the trade-off in my opinion. Like I said, I'll take it, but tops 1. Who else do we have for money? We've got Athletes. Athletes, probably another C tier. Again, like just a small amount of money with a really small ability. Getting to refresh your party does something, but it's not much, to be honest. And splitting the resources like this is not great either. It's +2 as opposed to +1, but I would rather have the extra cash, I think. These two are very close, and the marginal ability only brings this up just a hair. So, again, not really happy having any of these, and if I do, I kind of only want one. Moving up from there, though, would be probably Wild Buddy. Not Wild Buddy, Rockstar. So Rockstar gets us 5 resources, that's a nice chunk for 1 unit. It is trouble, so this is another one that I probably only want to take 1 of. It does go up to B tier though, because it is a nice mix of resources, and it's a good target if you have nothing else to use photographer on. It's a nice person to be able to take a couple pictures of. Gambler though, I have above that. Gambler I think is the better mix with 2 pop 3 cash. Just a slightly better return for what you're getting. Of course, both give you 5, both give you trouble. I would rather be ramping a little bit harder to cash than the popularity. We also have the Investigator. Investigator only gets you 2. This ability is pretty minor. Look at the top, and you can toss it away if you'd like. So the only way to get value out of it is if you actually get rid of something, right? So the more, like, the better of an item, the better units that you have, the more likely that this is actually going to be a useful ability. When your deck is full of Ds, if you have to kick out a troublemaker off the top of your deck because you're going to go bust, then that's a fine use, but not great. If you have to let an old pal in because the only thing that you're trying to do is use this to mitigate trouble, that's not a good scenario. So this is a very minor upside. It's basically just $2, which I have above the athlete because I'd rather have the 2 in cash than the 2 spread out. And then is that enough to get it up to B tier? I think so. Next up, we've only got a couple more cash makers left. We'll do the stars last. We have Gangster. So Gangster is the first S tier. 4 is just such a huge number. It's all in one resource. It does come with trouble, but this is the kind of unit that you can buy one, and every single time it shows up is just like a massive, massive payoff. So even though it's trouble and you probably can't afford more than one, even if you buy it on your first round and you end up throwing a bunch of small parties, the fact that you're making $4 off of one unit makes up for it basically every time. And one of the best things that you can do, one of the great cheap plays, and many a campaign is started and won because of an early Gangster. Only slightly above that is going to be the Auctioneer. So Auctioneer is 1 less cash, only 3. Also costs more. Auctioneer is 9. And so a little bit harder to get started, but the payoff is great. $3 is $3, and you're happy to see it. Also, this is the first one that I'm happy to really be adding multiple copies of. Auctioneer, I'm pretty happy with the second Auctioneer. Now the third is a little tricky, but the second is typically very good. And the first is just fantastic. Like, if this is your option for money making, you're going to be in good shape. And then we have, of course, the top of the S tier, the Bartender. Bartender gets you 1 popularity and then $2 per trouble. And getting 2 trouble in a party is not hard. So this is very often 5 resources, which is better than the troublemaker. And this doesn't even add trouble to your party. Just absolutely massive hit. And then if you can combo it with literally anything else, it gets even better. But on its own, just 5 resources, no trouble, is S tier. Absolute S tier material. And so that's all the money. Let's go over activated abilities. Because the rest of the specialized units, the rest of the ones after this are going to all interact with this kind of chunk of activated abilities. So we've got the tutors. First up is the Magician. Magician changes out a non-star for a star or a star for a non-star. So you can't take Magician until you have star units. Once you have star units, though, these become very good. Because when you don't have enough stars to fill a party, you just get rid of them as soon as they show up, or, in some of these cases, after you use their activated ability, then you kick them out of the party and replace them with someone who's going to score points. Quite a good combo, but they don't do anything early, so they're going to go a little bit lower. This is another unit that I'm willing to buy 4 of, but not until I have 4 stars in my deck, in my Rolodex. Are we going to end up there? We have 2 other tutors. So there's the Private Eye. Private Eye brings his own popularity. 2 popularity, costs $1. The costing $1 is going to make it a little bit harder to take early. This is another unit where I am happy taking 1 copy. Definitely happy having 1 copy in the middle of the game. You don't want it too early. I want 3 other guests that I would like to be able to find with my Private Eye before I add him to the Rolodex. So like if I have whatever it is, if I have 3 top tier units, 3 individual top tier units, like 2 auctioneers and someone who's getting us popularity, then I'm fine taking the first one. If I only have like 1 auctioneer, I would rather take the second auctioneer before I take a second private eye. If I only have one gangster, the trouble makes it a little bit more likely that I would rather get the private eye over the second, but it's close. You know, there's chances that I might just want the second private eye instead of slowing down my cash acceleration for a little bump in popularity and finding something that I want. And then there's Driver. So Driver is interesting. Driver makes no resources on its own. So in theory, it's worse than the private eye. You know, private eye is +1, net +1. This is net 0. And, you know, it's really sharing its resources. If I use a driver to find an auctioneer, now I'm taking up 2 slots in my party and making $3. So that's $1.50 per slot. I would definitely be better off having 2 auctioneers than having the driver in that spot. But when you start to consider trouble, then it evens out pretty quickly. Because I'd rather guaranteed find my gangster than have 2 gangsters a lot of the time. And, you know, the calculation difference there is that we're not losing the dollar. And that can actually make a difference. It makes a difference in how early that I'm willing to take the driver compared to the private eye. So private eye's fine once we're off of money. You know, once we get past those first 5 to 10 turns or so, where we're really trying to make sure we can get as much money in as possible. And it is good once we switch into popularity. Driver is still good when we're earning money because it finds all of our good money makers. And even though it takes up a slot, it's going to be worth it basically all the time. Although, again, I still only want 1. Until I have 4 stars, until I'm trying to throw a 4-star party, I kind of really only want 1, maybe a second, but there's diminishing returns. Often I would rather add a second copy of one of the units that I would be tutoring for than to add the second driver that early because he adds no resources on his own. But the first one can be pretty significant to how the rest of the game plays out, so definitely like having those. Then we have Stylist, and Stylist costs a cash and then adds +1. So the first time you get Stylist, it's net 0, right? You +1 popularity, -1 cash, and similar to the private eye, you don't want to take it too early because it's going to slow down your cash gains, right? It's turning them into popularity, which is fine once you get a little bit later, but not so great on the first couple of turns. But the balance there, though, is you want it as early as possible so you can start making big popularity numbers on one unit. And what it'll let you do is, you know, add it onto units that you already want showing up. You know, being able to add a popularity onto any of your S tier or even the A tier units is going to make them that much better when they show up, and it's going to make them better with stuff like Photographer and Cheerleader. So Stylist has a lot of versatility, only slightly kept back by the fact that you do need to pay money, and you need Stylist to show up in pair with the unit that you've been styling to get the full effect, right? So if we throw 5 parties and every time I get the Stylist and let's say I have an Auctioneer, every time they both show up, I'm getting the full value out of the Stylist because I get the popularity that the cumulative popularity that she earns from the second unit, and I'm getting the accumulation from her ability this turn. right? If we just get the Auctioneer, we get the cumulative amount, but we don't get the accumulation from the one. So it kind of splits it up, makes it a little bit difficult to get full value out of, and is something that you do have to balance your cash gains with where you take this. So it can be a little tricky, but a very good unit overall. Again, another one that I'm only looking for 1, maybe 2 copies of. And we supplement those with additional cheerleaders if we want more units, since it's an activated ability. And then we'll do cheerleader last, just because it'll make more sense how busted it is. Let's just throw our worst one on here. It's the greeter. Greeter gets a D. It's just a little bit too random. It opens the door and lets you score a unit. And of course, if you open the door and get an S unit, you're going to feel so good about it. And if you get anything else, it's just going to be as good as the unit you let in. And if you take it early, there's a high chance that it scores a D tier unit. And that's not great. And if you get it late, well, it's probably just taking up space. Just not a very good unit to have overall. Photographer, though. Photographer's way up there. So Photographer lets you score a unit. And with our big number of units, it's going to go real hard. Even with our 5s, that's a lot. That's a lot to add on. And the fact that you are net 0, but gaining popularity towards a phase where you probably want popularity. It's not even that bad with cash, though. You take a photo of a gangster, you score $8 minus the 1 is 7, and you get a popularity. Like, that's still a really good return. Same with the gambler and the rock star. Both very good to take photos of without needing any other manipulation. And of course, if you can combo the photographer with someone who you've been styling up, goes absolutely off the rails. Insane numbers. The absolute reason why there is a cap on popularity and money gains is because of the kind of sick things you can do with enough of these. And with our last unit, which is the cheerleader. Cheerleader reactivates all of our activated units, right? And so far, that's our searches, our photographer, our stylist, even our private eyes, and our house refreshes. It retriggers all of them. So it doubles up every single good unit that we have, lets us get multiple units, multiple uses out of these things that would otherwise be costing us. These are kind of balanced around the fact that they cost $1 for them to be at your party, and you get 1 use. So when you add that second use, it completely changes the balance of the resources that they give you, because they're less about the resource and more about the activated ability. The resource is a negative in order to balance out the ability, and when you get to double up the abilities, now all of a sudden these go up at least a full grade. Every cheerleader is making your photographers that much better, is making your stylist that much better. It's making all of your units significantly better. So definitely goes in S tier, definitely something that is going to be cornerstone to all of the busted builds, all of your ways to go off, and ways to cap out popularity, ways to finish rounds as early as possible. A lot of them are only available to you if you have cheerleader. Okay, so next up is trouble mitigation, and there's a lot of activated abilities in trouble mitigation. We'll start with the bottom, and that's the counselor. Counselor removes trouble. Doesn't take them out of the party, just removes the X. And removing the X means that they no longer score with our best unit, so not the best way to take care of it. It can let you have a bigger party, right? You can invite guests until you have 2 trouble, remove their trouble, keep going until you have 2 more. and, potentially reactivate, remove more trouble. So it can have an effect, but the fact that it gives no resources is pretty bad, and the fact that it takes away from our other combos is also pretty bad, putting it very low. If I do end up in a scenario where I want these, it's probably something that has to do with dinosaurs more than anything else. It's because I'm trying to fill up a party and I just need to be able to invite more troublemakers. Pretty low priority though, and again, like most of the C's, something that I really only want one copy of, if that's what it comes to. And same with the griller. So we talked earlier about the athlete. Athlete I do still think is a better spread of resources, 1 in 1 versus 2 in popularity. I would slightly lean towards the money. And it is a triggered ability again, so you can activate cheerleader with it. Just not that great. It's a reshuffle, so it does potentially let you invite more guests, but it doesn't actually deal with any of the trouble. So that's going to keep it on the low end. And same with our spy dog. So spy dog is probably here, maybe slightly above athlete. These are all pretty similar, a very marginal ability. It does work with cheerleader, but it's such a small ability that you may not even notice. You may get it 2 or 3 times and you wouldn't even notice that you had the ability. This is basically just 2 popularity and meh. So it's fine filler, but not really something that I want a lot of. And if it's the only way to deal with trouble, then you'll take it, but you're not going to be happy about it. Then we have the boots. So boots can actually get rid of trouble, let you bring in more. The nice thing about the boot is if you're not at your full trouble capacity, you can kick out an old buddy or a rich pal. Maybe you're done making money and you just want to get rid of the rich pal, because even if it brings in an old buddy, you would much rather have the 1 popularity than the $1. Or if you're at a point where it's flipped and you still need the money, you kick out a low popularity and maybe you happen to let in someone who makes a little bit more money, or even just a single dollar. And if your party is perfect, the boot can just boot themselves out. And so with all that together, it's a fine unit and you're going to take it. You can also re-trigger it with cheerleader, which is very effective. Now, you do need to be a little cautious. Of course, you don't want to be kicking your security guards out preemptively. If you know you can draw into a cheerleader, maybe that's where it can get a little tricky. You kick out a rich buddy, so you keep the security guard around so you can roll into a cheerleader, and then the cheerleader can reactivate the security guard, and then security guard can kick security out. Overall, it's fine. The fact that it's never fully dead, it can always just remove itself and put something else in its place, is going to keep it in the B range. It's not something that I want a ton of early. It is something that does help make sure you can get all your star guests in, especially if you are having issues with trouble. But even then, if you're removing a trouble, it does still take up another slot, and it's not putting anything towards your popularity. So 1 or 2 units, maybe a little bit more if you're having trouble filling a party. Our other boot, though, significantly better. You get 2 popularity with a wrestler, and the 2 popularity is enough to really turn the tides on how this works. Where security guard boots himself when he's bad, when the wrestler's not looking good, you get to boot someone who makes less. And even if you just boot out 1 rich pal and bring in 1 old buddy, that's a good use. That's still a fine use of this slot, because it got to trade 1 resource into a better resource for you at the time. and provides a decent amount of resources on his own. And again, works with Cheerleader, so can really get some snowbally builds there, especially since this is a unit that I'm willing to take multiples of. You get 2-3 of these, you get a Cheerleader and activate it multiple times, and then all of a sudden you can knock out all of your ones. You know, all these units that you took early that only make one resource, you know, net one resource. Even ones that you've used already, you know, like your Stylist, you can use and then boot out the Stylist, bring someone else in, and you go from having a slot that's at -1 to a slot that's like +1 or +2 or 3 or 4. Can really make the difference in ramping to whether it's more popularity or more money. So very good all around, nice to have, and nice set of combos with the Cheerleader. And then we have Cupid. So Cupid is the only unit that when you invite, when Cupid comes in the door, you can end up with less units than when you started. So you have 3 units, you invite Cupid, you go up to 4, you activate Cupid, you go down to 2. It is the only unit that can let you go negative by inviting them in. And that alone is worth the entry. And otherwise it functions pretty similar to a boot. It's 1 less popularity. And you're probably not going to catch two troubles, because they do need to be directly next to each other. You need to have 2 units directly next to each other, and your chances of getting 2 trouble right next to each other, not too high, but you know, maybe you get a trouble and a rich pal when you're just trying to ramp popularity, and you know, you get to invite more people now because you removed 1 trouble, and you get to invite more potential popularity by kicking out a basic resource, whether it's just a single popularity unit or a single buck. And then of course that's multiplied with the Cheerleader, and that actually brings it above the Wrestler for me. Being able to go down units, I think, is pretty significant, especially when you're trying to get the star units in. You know, Wrestlers are neutral. Your boots are neutral when you're trying to get the star guests in. This gives you an extra slot, so it just lets you see more of your Rolodex. And if you don't have the tutors to find your star units, this can be the game breaker as to making sure you have enough slots to invite all your star units. All right. Almost done with trouble mitigation. We're down to our white flags. And white flags let us bring more trouble in, lets us fill up more parties. And the fuller our parties, the more popularity we earn, easier it is going to be to buy our star guests. So our white flags are going to be absolutely vital to making our biggest parties happen. And so where does that put them? Well, for me, that's going to put them top of A tier. No, they're going to be in the S tier. And then the only question is, how far up in the S tier do they make it? Are they better than Cheerleader? Maybe. Better than Gangster? Well, you need them to really make your trouble engines kind of work. And, you know, at 1 popularity, though, it's not a lot of resources. So, and it's not an ability that you can re-trigger. Maybe it's like right in this range. But the 2 popularity on the cute dog, I am willing to definitely say that is enough to come above the Gangster. It's everything that you want. It lets you have a huge party. It turns on some of your best units, and overall, like, this is something that I'm happy to have 3 copies of, and it's not even that uncommon that I end up with 4. Hippie only gaining 1, I'm less likely to have 4, but sometimes it's necessary. sometimes you don't have any other way to remove trouble, and you just need to have the 4 flags. And at that point, you'll take whatever you can get, and if it's 4 hippies, it's 4 hippies. And yeah, but both of these easily make S tier. They really just make the game tick and make sure that you can get everything that you need to do done. Okay, and now we're on to popularity. So the next chunk are all invites that only add to your popularity, right? Just here to make sure that you can buy star units. And so maybe we do star units first, or at least talk about them a little bit. So Alien is a 40-star unit, and then the full range is Dinosaur at 25, Dragon at 30, Mermaid at 35, Alien at 40, Ghost at 45, yeah, Unicorn at 45, Superstar at 50, Leprechaun at 50, and Genie at 55. And so when we're trying to make popularity, we were trying to, some of these, like, you can buy 2 in a round if you can get up to 65, 50, 60 popularity in a party. But most of these, we're trying to get to a point where we can get 1 unit every party or every other party once we really put the gas to making big amounts of popularity, right? So 20, 25 popularity at a go is what we're looking for. And if we can do that, we can grab a star every other round, or maybe 2 in a round, depending on how much popularity, or 1 every round. Just depends on how our popularity makers play out. And so with that in mind, the bigger the number of the popularity, the better that these are going to be, right? We'll start with kind of let's start with the low end. We've got the Mascot, and Mascot relies on having D characters show up to your party. And in my book, anything that relies on having your worst units present is not good. These are the units that I want to be kicking out, right? These are the units that I want to be removing whenever possible. And so if that's your only way to make popularity, I mean, I've done it. I've had bad seeds where this is how you have to go. But if you have anything else, you should not be doing Mascot. Slightly up from Mascot, we actually have a number of options. So of course we already have a bunch of 2 popularity things in the C tier, but we're gonna throw in a couple slightly higher ones at 4, and they're gonna be our 2 troubles. So again, how much trouble you can have show up to a party is going to lean very heavily on how many flags you can have. And even if you have enough flags, between the 4 wild buddies that you already have, and the fact that some of your best troublemakers are also your best cash generators, there's a possibility that you can't afford to add more trouble into your deck. And so these are both C tier because even when you can take them, there's a good chance that you can only take 1 or maybe 2 copies. So even though they're 4s, we're trying to get 25-ish popularity a turn. You can only take 1 or 2. If you could take 4 of these and get, have all 4 show up and get 16 popularity, that would be one thing. But the fact that you're only going to end up with 1 or 2 in your Rolodex, and therefore you're really limiting how much popularity they can ever give you, is going to limit how high that you can actually take them. And so those are our only troublemaker popularities that are troublemakers. We do have a couple that are cash negative. Maybe we do those two next, because this is an interesting pair. We have the Caterer, which is 4 popularity minus 1 cash. And then we have Comedian, which is all or nothing. You either get 0 popularity or 5 popularity if you have a full house, and negative 1 cash. So net 3 resources, net either negative 1, which is or 4. And so, of course, you're only going to take this if you feel that you can properly set it up. So we're only really going to talk about it as having a full house, as a 5 plus 5 and a minus 1, and not put as much weight on the 0. Although, you know, it does happen. It happens on occasion. So where do we put these? 4 plus 4 minus 1 plus 5 minus 1. And, you know, you'd think they're close. But the plus 5, you know, going up to 20 popularity, it's better. It's a healthy amount better than the plus 4. You know, you do still need a little bit of cash flow going. But if we're talking about a unit that, you know, we're trying to max out on popularity, if we want to buy 4 copies of something, 4 copies of the Comedian give us 20, 4 copies of the Caterer give us 16. And so, like, it's like you get a free Caterer, right? Without having to pay for it. You know, 25% bonus over Caterer, however you want to look at that. I think that's enough for a full grade difference. So where do these end up? Well, Caterer, I think, is like a C or maybe bottom of B tier. And so that's going to put Comedian at like top of B or bottom of C tier. I think I'm pretty happy with either of these spots. I think this actually feels pretty right to me. And then we have, we have a slightly smaller number. We have Mr. Popular, and he's 3, and he brings 1 guest. So we talked about Celebrity. Celebrity brings 2 guests. 2 is significantly worse than bringing 1 guest. But this is still a unit that I only want like 1 or 2 copies of. And so similar to our Trouble units that bring 4 and Trouble, and only bring that we only want 1 or 2 copies of. I kind of think of it like these two, like our Auctioneer and our Gangster. You know, a 3 and a 4, where 1 has Trouble and 1 doesn't. I do give an edge to the one that's not Trouble, even though you can technically still throw a party. Have a party called on you because of the invite. I think this is a fine unit to have 1 or 2 of, just like this is a fine unit to have 1 or 2 of. I don't think you're excited to have to try to max out on either one of these if you're short on ways to gain popularity, though. Good little supplement if you just feel like you need a little bit more popularity in your deck. Okay, how about Dancer? So Dancer is an interesting one. Dancer, 1 copy gets 1, 2 score 2, 3 score 3, 4 score 4. And so where does that fall? Well, of course, 1 is down here. 1 copy is as good as an old pal. 2 is right around here, like just slightly worse than these 2s with a minor ability. 3 is an upgrade. In fact, I might even put 3s here. And then 4 would get into A tier, like Comedian is net 4. It is more popularity, so I would rather have the Comedians when I'm trying to ramp up popularity. But, you know, they're not that far off. But that's at best case scenario. And you need all 4 to show up. So it is good with stuff like Driver, but it is also something that you need to buy the 4X. If you're not buying the 4X, it's just not going to be good returns. Whereas Comedian, you can buy 2 Comedians and still be good. You buy 2 Dancers and they're garbage. So you need to buy 4, which kind of drags it down a little bit. I do still put it above the Caterer doesn't move above some of these other units, though. That, I think not. I think it's still a low B, but certainly serviceable. It is something that you need to consider when you're building the rest of your Rolodex up until this point. The smaller Rolodex you have, the more ways that you have to boot things, the better, because the more people you see from your Rolodex. You know, Dancer can make more sense. If you only have white flags to deal with trouble, well, then you need the white flags to balance out the trouble, and then you need enough slots left over to fill with dancers, whereas if you can just kick the trouble out, you just end up with naturally more spaces for the dancer. So it is going to vary a couple slots depending on whether you have white flags or you have boots. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it in the B range. Then we have Writer. So Writer is +2 popularity for every trouble you have. So if you have no white flags, tops out at 5, +5, which is the same as Comedian except no cash. Doesn't have the negative. So immediately above Comedian, you know, because Comedian can also bottom out. You could theoretically have a party where you have only one trouble and the score's 3 instead of 5. But if you have any of your white flags, you can easily ramp this up to 7 or more. Combos really well with Photographer and your Cheerleader to just make massive amounts of popularity. And so where does that put you? I think it's like up here, maybe above. Is it above Driver? Possibly. Is it above Photographer? That one might be a little closer. But you can get absolutely massive numbers out of your Writer. And even if it's just a mediocre, even if it's just making 5 popularity and you have nothing to push it past that, 5's good. Fives will get you stars. You know, a couple writers and you fill out the rest of your room. You know, if you have 2 trouble, they're typically worth 2 popularity on their own anyway. So a couple writers, a couple troublemakers, and then these are 5s. 5 + 2, and then 5 + 2. So you're talking like 14 across 4 units. It's a really good average. It's going to get you plenty of popularity and should help finish your days out. Get you plenty of headroom to be able to get all the stars you need. And all right, so that leaves us 2 more popularity gainers, and then we're on to the stars. And we have Introvert and Climber. So let's do Climber. Climber's fascinating. So Climber starts, the first time Climber shows up, Climber's worth 1. Okay, that's same as an old buddy. The second time, you know, we just did this with Dancer, right? Second time, it's like slightly worse than these 2s. Third time, right around here, probably under the Caterer, but above Mr. Popular. And then 4, you know, somewhere around here, probably under Comedian, because Comedian does actually get the number 5. Right, and then it's 5 with no cash, and then it's 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and goes all the way up, right? But where does it land? Because it doesn't get you 9 every time. And there are combos, right? You can send your Climber out and then have the Climber come back in and gain 2 popularity in a round. But that's taking pretty low tier units in order to make your better unit, to benefit your better unit, which generally unadvisable. I do not advise taking C's to try to make your S's and A's better. I'd rather just take more S's and A's than needlessly filling your deck for small gains. Still works just as well with Photographer. even as you're growing. It doesn't grow again, but it does score you potentially a large chunk of popularity. And yeah, so it also gives, you know, a little bit extra use to your cheerleader, letting you retrigger and bring in yet another time. So climber, very good. But let's be realistic about it, because I think there are some people who will just drop this right into S and say it's the best thing you can do, because climber make number big. So let's look at a scenario. You pick up a climber. Climber's super expensive. It's 12 popularity to get, so it doesn't come all that early. Typically, you know, I mean, your best case is after the second party, but that's not particularly likely. Probably 3 parties in before you see a climber. And even then, you typically want to spend on cash first. So this is like party 5 that climber's showing up. So let's say climber shows up for 9 parties in a row. You get the climber. You shows up the first party, gets 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. 9 parties in, she's made 45 popularity for you. Divided by those 9 parties, that's 5 pop per party. Okay, so 5 pop a party, that's right here. That's A tier for sure. But that's only when she shows up for 9 out of 9 parties. If she shows up 6 out of 9 parties, that's 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6. That's only 21. And if we have someone who's showing up for 6 out of 9 parties, well, Comedian showing up 6 out of 9 parties, that's 30 popularity. Even Monkey showing up 6 out of 9 parties, that's 24 popularity. So 6 out of 9 is down here. And not until we get to 7 are they tie, right? 7 out of 9 parties, you're up to 28 popularity. 7 out of 9 parties that the Monkey shows up, also 28 popularity. And, you know, Monkey triggers just as well with the Photographer for those first couple rounds. It gets you the popularity earlier. You know, you score 4, 4, 4, while this is scoring 1, 2, 3. And that lets you buy more units that you might need to round out the rest. You know, Climber costing 12 is a big cost. Climber getting to the second climber, well, Climber goes 1, 2, 3, 4. That's only 10. So for Climber alone to afford another climber, she has to show up 5 times. Whereas for either of these to afford another copy of the same unit, only needs to show up twice. So there's a lot going against Climber. You need the Climber to show up. You need the Climber to show up significant amount of times. You need to get the Climber early enough so that can happen. You know, if your goal is to have the Climber show up 9 times and you can only get her to show up, let's say 2/3 of the time, you know, 6 out of 9, we need to add how many more parties on just to get the Climber to show up? What's that, another 6 parties or so? And so that's like 15 turns just to get the Climber to max out. I think the large number, like I said, I think the large number makes people think this is better. It is still very good. It is A tier, for sure. Is it better than Writer? Well, Writer, I think, consistently scores 5, much easier than the Climber does. Climber also has issues that, you know, you need to fill the party because you need to find the Climber. So if your deck isn't that slim, or if you just haven't been able to buy that many slots in your house, you may have more issues getting Climber to show up every time. Whereas getting the Writer to show up is really just a matter of getting the second Trouble to show up. And that is slightly easier, and you can do it without getting a full house, whereas Climber tends to need the full house more often to get the full payoff, to get all the copies that you have. So I think these two are very close. And, you know, if you put one ahead of the other, I'm not going to fault you, but I do think that they should be basically right next to each other in the final run out of things, which leaves us with Introvert. All right, so what does Introvert do? Introvert scores 1 and then +1 for every empty house slot. Okay, so if we open the door, bring in an Introvert, and then end the party, every slot scores like an old pal, which is not good. Your average should be above that, right? And so that's real bad. That's actually pretty similar to what the Mascot's doing. But what Introvert is, it's another 4x. It's another 4x like Dancer is. If you don't have the 4, it's not worth it because you need the second one before it does anything. So Dancer, you need 2, and then 2 puts it in C tier. When you have 2 introverts at a party, every empty slot is now a C tier unit, right? It's getting you that C tier level of Dancer for every empty slot that you have. And so what does that do? Well, it just brings up your entire average, right? It counteracts every low grade that you could possibly get. It makes sure everything is getting you popularity. You know, I said they're all C tier units, but the truth of the matter is, if some of those were going to not give you any popularity, it's converting those into, better units. And just makes other slots, even more valuable. And then the real juice is when you can get 3 into a party, and then you're getting 3 for every empty space. Now, that can be a little trickier to pull off. You do need a fairly slim Rolodex, and you probably want some boots to clean out house, or even better, the Cupid, since Cupid is, like we talked about, the only unit that lets you go down in house slots once they show up. And then comboed with the Cheerleader can do some absolutely insane things. Like, you fill up your entire house, and then you kick out a whole bunch of people, you reuse Cupid, kick out a whole bunch more people, and now all of a sudden you found 3 or 4 introverts, and you have all these empty house slots because you kicked out everybody who's not an introvert, and you're getting 3 or 4 popularity per slot. And if you get 3 per slot, there's nothing better than that. I don't think there's a way to make your Rolodex better than that. Not to mention the fact that it works with Photographer, so you can immediately score all of that. I think Introvert is the best way to gain popularity. Now, you do need to get cash going, right? You need enough slots so that this can be a significant number. Because, you want, what did we say? We want to be able to buy a star like every other round. And if we're talking, let's say 50, or if we want to just go right in the middle, 40. So we need 20 popularity per party. So that's 9 empty slots and 2 introverts. That's 20 popularity. And that's all we need. So that's not that many house slots, really. Only 11 total, minus the ones that we start with. That's pretty reasonable. I think you can get to a scenario where you just take a little bit of money, buy slots until you're at like 11 slots or so, and then buy introverts. Of course, if you have ways to find your introverts, even better. Again, I would still take 4 before I would start maxing out on things like drivers to find more introverts. But, once you have the 4, every driver that you invite, it's not quite a full card because it does still fill up an empty slot. It is going to subtract from your total, but 2 introverts and then a driver for a third is still is still better than basically anything else that would be in this particular slot. Spending 2 slots on the introverts is definitely worth it. for rolling an extra one. And that's all the guests. We'll do stars now. I'm going to put the stars on the same list because I think we can fit them. Obviously there are restrictions for when you're going to buy them, but I still think they do deserve to be ranked because they definitely have different appeals at different stages. And it's actually kind of the inverse of what they cost, right? So the best one to get early are two. It's going to be the Genie and the Ghost, right? Ghost for a lot of the same reasons that the Boot is good, and because when you don't need this guest that adds 0 resources, they kick themselves out. And when you need them to kick something else out in order to enable something else, whether that's opening up slots for your Introvert to score more points, or whether it's kicking out some troublemakers so you can fit in more trouble, or kicking out someone who would cost you money otherwise, the Boot is just a very nice slot to have. So as far as when you're going to buy them, this one's great. And then Genie does everything, because in addition to finding the things that you need, it also finds your next stars. So if you have 2 Genies, you're done. Any other 2 stars that you get are going to be plenty. Either you draw a Genie and another star, let's say an alien, and then the Genie finds the other Genie, and then that finds the other alien. As long as you can get 2, that's great. It's expensive, but it's a fine thing to put in your deck before your 4-star party. Whereas some of these other ones you really don't want to have in your Rolodex before you're ready to go off. Probably most significantly is the Leprechaun. Leprechaun adds $3, and money at this point in the game is not important. And it's expensive. Leprechaun costs 50, so costing 50 popularity, not giving you anything back except for a little bit of cash. Real hard to find a use for this. Not really something I'm looking forward to buying unless I have to be in a real tricky spot for this to be something that I want to pick up early. Or at least early as far as stars are concerned. The stars you don't want in your party for the most part, even the ones that are good when you don't have 4 stars in your Rolodex, like the Genie and the Ghost, you still don't want them until you have no other option but to buy a star guest. That is to say, you're topping out on popularity, you're about to run out of space, you're about to hit your popularity cap, and you need to spend it on something. I'm happy buying either of these. I'm not happy buying a Leprechaun. Maybe that makes it a D. I don't know. The other ones that I'm not really happy buying, Unicorn. If you're at this point in the game and you need to mitigate trouble and you have had nothing to mitigate trouble yet, sometimes it can be important to get 1 or 2 of these. But chances that it's going to make a significant impact are pretty low. It just doesn't quite do enough, and it's coming so late that it's not going to do. It's really not going to make the difference. Kind of same thing with the superhero. I could be convinced that superhero is actually like bottom of the B's. 3 popularity it's okay. Obviously at this point you are still gaining popularity. You're trying to fill up slots, as many house slots as possible. So it is better than the zeros, than some of the 0 popularity options, but it's not as good as your best scaling popularity options. And really only slightly, is it better than Dancer? Is it better than a Wild Buddy? It's tough. It's tough. And if you had it anywhere on the bottom half of the Bs, I think that's probably fine as well. If we want to keep all the stars together, it would, like I said, bottom B's, low, top C, somewhere right in that range. Is it better than Alien? Alien, you know what? 40 is a fine price. And if anything, maybe it comes out ahead because it's just that much cheaper. Is the 3 popularity worth the extra 10 popularity that you have to spend? Well, you'd have to get this 4 times. And are you going to see it 4 times? And if you do, then it just only breaks even. Right? And if you're not in a scenario where you have the 4 extra turns, you would rather just have the Alien. So I believe that does put Alien higher. Maybe not quite in the B range. It's not an ideal first pick. But it's fine filler. And, 40's reasonable. Especially if you're making, like, let's say 30 popularity a turn. You get to roll a decent amount of it into your next turn, right? It makes it a lot easier to buy 2 stars in back-to-back turns, as opposed to having someone like the what's this guy's? Superhero. Superhero, you're much more likely to have to buy every other turn. Whereas Alien, you can pull off buying in consecutive turns. That's just a lot harder to set up when you have to put in 50 popularity. And even if you capped your popularity, you only have 15 left over. If you capped popularity and bought an Alien, you have 25 left over. That's so much more to work with. You can have such a lighter turn the next turn and still be able to get that second star. Whereas needing to, having 15 left over and needing to get almost 40 more popularity in the next turn, that can be a little bit too much. So that's going to put Alien slightly higher in the C's for me. Maybe that even puts this here. Debatable. Okay, and so then we have our 3 budget options. We have Dinosaur at 25, Dragon at 30, Mermaid at 35. And Mermaid, similar to Alien, it's very easy to buy Mermaid on back-to-back turns. You can save up until you're almost max popularity, buy 1, and then very easily be able to buy the turn after that. So it's a very good way to cap off your stars. If you start with 1 or 2 of these, and then basically wait until you have enough popularity that you go back-to-back turns where you buy 2 mermaids, that's a pretty good setup. And, we talked about inviting 1 guest. It's really not that big of a deal. The other nice thing about Mermaid, even though Mermaid does invite a guest, you can tutor Mermaid up first. So that way you get it out of the way, and that you're not going to overflow the party with that guest. So it works well with any of the driver tutor effects, and it's nice and cheap. And cheap's good because it lets you buy the stars sooner, which lets you end parties sooner, gives you more opportunities to throw the 4-star parties while they're still good. And yeah, so all that said, I believe that puts Mermaid either bottom of the B's for the stars or top of the C's. Close. I could see arguments, since you don't want too many mermaids. Like, I don't want 4 mermaids, but I'm totally fine with 2. Whereas Alien, I would be fine with 4 aliens. If you have no other star options, does Alien look better? Yeah. But if you have other star options, I think I actually prefer the Mermaid for the discount. And so then, here we go. Dinosaur and Dragon, where do they fall? Dinosaur's trouble, right? Trouble's tricky, so let's hold off on that for a second. Dragon costs money, but at the point of the game where you need stars, money doesn't matter. And the only thing that matters is getting a 4-star party. So it only costs 30 popularity. You can buy 2 dragons in a turn. You can get all your stars in 2 turns. You know, if you have a way to max out your popularity, you could go from 0 stars to 4 stars in your deck in just a matter of 2 turns. And that's absolutely massive, because every turn before that is another turn with 2 less guests in your Rolodex, 2 less guests that could potentially show up and not give anything to your party. You know, if you had 2 aliens instead, because you had to buy them earlier, they're just wasting spots. They're wasting things that could otherwise go to more popularity to be able to buy more stars. So Dragon is good. The 3 cash kind of sucks. You know, if you don't have the boots or the Cupids in order to mitigate the dragons that you have to buy before the day you're going to throw your 4-star party, they can be a little painful. But you probably don't need house upgrades. So whatever money you still have trickling in, it's kind of fine that it goes to Dragon. And, you know, if you have any way to get rid of Dragon, whether that's a boot or a magician, it's very easy to mitigate, and being able to buy 2 in a turn is actually, I believe it's a pretty big deal for every other turn before that. So Dragon is going to end up, I have Dragon in the B tier. I have Dragon bottom of the Bs. And then there was Dinosaur, the cheapest one, 25. Now, of course, this requires setup. One of the few places where I end up picking Counselor is when I know I'm going for dinosaurs, because you just need to be able to let in more trouble. And, you know, you do need a specific setup. You need to look at your stars first when you're figuring out the rest of your build, because like maybe you're between 2 different money makers, like Investigator and a Gangster, but you know that you're going to go for dinosaurs in the end, so you avoid the trouble early, so that way you can put them into your deck. If you don't think about stars until you're going to buy your stars, Dinosaur is always going to look bad to you. If you think about your stars as soon as you see your guest list, Dinosaur is going to be good to you. You can buy 2 dinosaurs in a turn. In fact, you can buy 2 dinosaurs in 2 consecutive turns without even needing to max out your popularity. You can build up before then. Like, let's say you take a couple turns, build up to 65, buy 2 dinosaurs, right, for 50. You go down to 15. Now you only need 1 turn where you can make 35 popularity, which is not impossible. And then you can buy the next 2 dinosaurs the turn after that. And immediately put together a 4-star party in no time. And if you have just a little bit of setup, you know, making sure you're not taking too much trouble early, making sure that you have ways to mitigate the trouble. And really, this is where kicking things out is ideal. You know, your white flags are helpful for sure. But there is so much trouble packed into just your basic deck that it does make more sense when you have a certain number of trouble that you need to hit in order to win, that you can actually just remove some. But, you know, we're still talking about A tier cards and S tier characters that you're going to have at your party. We're not talking about dipping down into some less enviable guests in order to make your dinosaur good. I think dinosaur is just good. And so where does that put dinosaur? With those caveats, I think it's at the bottom of the Bs. And that's our party. That's our full guest list. And so, you know, if you have any thoughts about this, I think the conversation is the most important part of any tier list. Understanding, when to take them, why you take them, how many you're willing to take, because those things can vary. While a lot of the C's are things that I only want one copy of. We talked about Magician. In the end game, I want 4 Magicians. And a lot of the B's I only want 1 or 2 of, but Dancer I always want 4 of. And, when there are S tiers that you would want multiples, like I always want 4. 4 Introverts, but, this is an S tier card that I only want 1 copy of a lot of times. And so if you know those things, I think you can take this list and finish basically any party. So get out there, throw some great parties, and let me know how you did. Let me know what was good to you, who was bad to you, if you have thoughts otherwise, and maybe we'll jam some random games and try to show off this list and show you how it pays off.